Legend has it that a Nazi train filled with gold was lost 7 decades ago.
In a maze of massive, secret tunnels, rumors of buried treasure hidden for 70 years.
Right now, beneath the quiet forests of Poland, an entire train is said to be waiting. One that vanished without a trace more than 80 years ago. In 2015, 2 amateur treasure hunters announced they had finally uncovered its resting place.
2 people think they may now have found a Nazi German train rumored to have disappeared in Poland near the end of World War II.
The Polish government publicly declared they were 99% certain the discovery was real, and armed guards quickly moved in to secure the area, turning the once silent woods into a zone of intense suspicion and whispered excitement. Let's find out how the hidden Nazi gold train was finally found, and how what they discovered in the last car shocked the world. The train that vanished and the mountain that swallowed it. History often remembers the Nazis for the devastation they unleashed during World War II. But lately, whispers have turned to the fortunes they left in their wake. Excavators clawed deeper and deeper into the earth, anticipation mounting. When excavators in Walbrzych tore into the hillside and finally cracked open the first sealed chamber, everyone braced for a cinematic moment. Gold bars shining under work lamps, crates stuffed with stolen art, maybe even the kind of priceless relics that rewrite history books. Instead, something entirely different stared back at them, something that made seasoned workers freeze mid-breath. And just like that, everything shut down. No photos, no press access, no interviews. Even Fox News, not exactly known for ignoring wartime mysteries, asked why officials suddenly refused to talk. Workers were pulled, reassigned, or simply vanished from the project. The site was locked down so tightly you'd think they'd dug up a nuclear device instead of a rusty old train. But to understand why the reaction was so extreme, you have to go back to the moment this whole legend began. Long before treasure hunters, radar scans, or government investigations. Back to a winter so cold it felt like Europe itself was cracking. It's January 1945. Germany is falling apart faster than its leaders can lie about it. The Soviet Red Army is ripping westward, swallowing city after city. The air smells of burning paper, documents, archives, evidence, anything Nazi officials can toss into a fire before the Soviets arrive. Breslau, now Wrocław, is a city in chaos. Families flee with whatever they can carry. Officials bark contradictory orders. Every street feels like the last gasp of a regime desperate to hide what it's done. And in the middle of all this panic, something strange happens. Villagers living near the rail line report seeing a train unlike anything they'd ever seen. Not a passenger train, not a supply run. This thing is armored. Thick metal plating, mounted weapons, and enough SS guards to make anyone think twice about asking questions. Hundreds of crates are loaded under intense security, each one marked with official Nazi insignia. Some locals swear they saw glimpses of gold through cracked boards. Others describe wrapped paintings, jewelry, museum pieces, items that clearly had no business being thrown onto a military train. And then there's the most disturbing detail: the train's destination. Witnesses say it headed toward the Owl Mountains, a place where people already avoided wandering too far. Soldiers guarded the routes. Civilians were warned away. That entire region pulsed with a kind of manufactured fear. Then one night, after rolling into the mountains, the train vanishes. It was as if the earth swallowed it whole. People wrote off the story for decades. Just another wartime myth, historians said. Too many legends had emerged from the fog of war already. Ghost convoys, bunkers full of weapons the Nazis never finished, secret labs. But when you look closely at the Owl Mountains, it suddenly becomes harder to dismiss anything. Between 1943 and 45, the Nazis built something enormous there. Project Riese, meaning giant. Thousands of forced laborers from nearby concentration camps were marched into the mountains and worked until they collapsed. Literally. Miners dug through solid rock, carving miles of tunnels large enough to swallow entire buildings. Massive underground halls, steel-reinforced rooms, corridors that seemed to go on forever. Over 8 kilometers were carved out and then, shockingly, abandoned. Some tunnels were sealed mid-construction without explanation, others flooded out of nowhere. Entire chambers collapsed and were never dug out. To this day, huge sections remain unexplored because the ground is unstable, the air is toxic, or the tunnels are simply too dangerous. If you were going to hide something enormous, say an armored train this world wasn't meant to see again, this would be the place. And the locals? They never forgot. Decades passed, but the stories didn't die. People living near Walbrzych kept noticing odd things. Some swore they heard machinery humming deep underground, long after the war was over and long after any machinery should have existed. Others found abandoned rail tracks cutting straight into stone hillsides, ending in places where no tunnel should logically exist. And then there was the railroad worker's son, the man who said his father had been ordered in early 1945 to guard a train being loaded at night. He watched it roll into a tunnel entrance and never watched it come back out. If it was a myth, it was a persistent one. Persistent enough to keep treasure hunters coming back year after year with metal detectors, old maps, and way too much caffeine. Most left disappointed, but the legend never really went away. In 1975, an elderly German man, sick, dying, and apparently carrying a burden for 30 years, told a story that caught local interest again. He claimed he'd been part of the operation to hide the train. His details were oddly specific: the number of soldiers, the time of day, even the method used to seal the tunnel with explosives. Before he could show anyone the exact spot, he died. The confession remained unverified, but it added fuel to a fire that refused to burn out. By the time 2015 rolled around, most people had written off the gold train as local folklore with good storytelling legs. Then Piotr Koper and Andreas Richter walked into the picture, one a construction expert who knew how to read the earth, the other a German historian obsessed with wartime rail logistics. Not exactly Indiana Jones, but close enough. But here's the thing. What happened in Walbrzych wasn't the beginning of the story. Not even close. The truth behind the missing Nazi gold train had roots stretching far beyond Poland. The salt mine that proved the myths were real. For decades, treasure hunters traded stories about hidden Nazi gold the way sailors once traded ghost tales. Half-truths, rumors, and wishful thinking all stirred together. If any discovery was ever going to validate the legend, most people assumed it would happen in Poland, maybe even inside that fabled ghost train, said to be sealed beneath the forests. But the truth didn't break open in Poland at all. It happened in Germany, and it erased any remaining doubt that enormous amounts of stolen wealth had indeed been stashed in places no sane person would expect. The revelation began quietly in April 1945. 2 French civilians approached a group of American soldiers and delivered a tip with the kind of confidence that made people lean in. They claimed a salt mine near the village of Murkers was being used for something far more suspicious than pulling minerals out of the earth. They said the Germans had been hiding something valuable deep underground. Now, by this stage of the war, American troops had heard every wild story imaginable: gold buried under farmhouses, priceless paintings sealed inside bunkers, entire bank vaults sunk into lakes. 90% of it was nonsense. But there was something about these civilians' certainty that made the soldiers take the chance. So they followed the lead, expecting maybe a crate or two of weapons, not the discovery that would leave hardened combat veterans literally speechless. When United States forces descended into the cold, echoing tunnels of the mine, they emerged into a chamber that looked less like part of a war zone and more like a dragon's hoard. Stacked in neat, almost obsessive precision were 8,000 gleaming gold bars, arranged like wood for a winter cabin. Nearby were 3,000 heavy bags packed with coins, and crate after crate of foreign currency, pounds, francs, lira, dollars, loot stripped from every corner of occupied Europe. And that was just the outer layer. Venturing deeper, the soldiers uncovered what the Germans had truly feared losing: hundreds of stolen masterpieces, paintings taken from Polish, Dutch, French, and Belgian museums, sculptures wrapped in blankets as if tucking them in for a long sleep, Byzantine mosaics, Islamic rugs, Roman artifacts, even ancient papyri that had turned soft in the salty air. Entire nations had mourned these treasures as lost forever. Yet here they were, stacked in an underground vault like someone's private gallery. Then came the darkest discovery. Scattered among the official Reich loot were bags of personal belongings, rings pulled from fingers, watches stripped from wrists, gold fillings torn from the mouths of concentration camp victims, melted down and cast into bars. There was no way to interpret this gently. The mine didn't just hold wealth. It held evidence of systematic plunder carried out with cold, industrial efficiency. When the Americans tallied the numbers, the gold alone was worth over $5 billion in today's money, from one mine. Word of the find moved up the chain of command like an electric shock. Within days, General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself arrived to see the hoard with his own eyes, accompanied by Generals Patton and Bradley. They brought photographers, scribes, and anyone who needed to witness what would become one of the most astonishing treasure recoveries in modern history. Detailed inventories were made. Every bar, every painting, every coin was cataloged. This wasn't just about accounting. It was about ensuring the world would know exactly what had been stolen. And the story didn't begin with that one civilian tip. A month earlier, as Germany scrambled in desperation, the Reich Ministry for Education had ordered priceless art collections moved into mines for safekeeping. Dr. Paul Ortwin Rav, a respected curator from Berlin, was tasked with shepherding these cultural treasures underground. He quickly realized some mines were unsuitable, so subsequent shipments were diverted to Murkers, which boasted more than 35 miles of tunnels and a dozen hidden entrances. Between March 20 and 31, Germany funneled a fourth of the major holdings of 14 Prussian state museums into this sprawling maze. Rav was ordered to remain there and guard them, an almost ironic duty considering who had stolen the artwork in the first place. Then came Patton's Third Army. On April 4, as American forces swept into the area, the village of Murkers fell. By April 6, Lieutenant Colonel William Russell began hearing rumors from displaced civilians. Gold, art, valuables, massive quantities hidden in the mine. Interviews with German officials confirmed the unbelievable truth. The mine held the entire gold reserve of the German Reichsbank, plus the relocated masterpieces Rav had overseen. The Americans moved fast. Tanks were positioned at every tunnel entrance. Machine gun jeeps patrolled the roads. Guards stood watch over the factory areas and essential power systems. The mine was sealed like a fortress, not to keep anyone out, but to ensure nothing inside disappeared before it could be documented. At 10 a.m. on April 7, Russell and a group of officers descended the mine shaft, 2,100 feet beneath the surface, and began the inspection that would soon make headlines around the world. Over the next day, the discoveries multiplied. Captain Robert Posey of the Monuments Men Unit and his assistant, PFC Lincoln Kirstein, arrived to inspect the artwork. Their reactions bordered on disbelief. Ancient Egyptian papyri, Roman and Greek decorative pieces, Renaissance woodcuts, and canvases by masters like Raphael, Rembrandt, Goya, and Van Dyck. Treasures thought lost for eternity now sat under flickering lamps in a salt-carved vault. The true scale of Nazi looting was something historians already suspected, but the Murkers mine made it painfully real. Trains, convoys, SS couriers. Germany had stripped Europe with methodical brutality, moving wealth across the continent like a massive shadow economy. And even with the mine's billions recovered, the numbers were staggering. An estimated $580 billion worth of stolen assets in today's money had passed through Nazi hands. Less than 20 has ever been found. So the mine raised the question that haunts treasure hunters and historians alike. If one vault held this much, what else is still out there? Well, the Nazis ensured the ocean would help keep some of them. Drowned riches, the treasures the Nazis tried to hide beneath the waves. If you want to understand just how far the Nazis went to erase their own crimes and keep their stolen wealth out of Allied hands, you have to look underwater. Not in dramatic sunken temples or shipwrecks glowing in the deep, but in quiet alpine lakes whose surfaces barely ripple. Lakes so still and picturesque that tourists take photos, unaware that beneath those calm waters lie crates, corpses, forgeries, weapons, and possibly millions in lost gold. The strangest of all these places is Lake Toplitz, tucked deep inside Austria's Salzkammergut region. From above, it looks harmless, a postcard scene framed by cliffs and evergreens. But the moment you try to understand what waits below, the lake becomes something else entirely, a natural vault, a time capsule, and for many unlucky divers, a watery tomb. Lake Toplitz is beautiful, yes, but it is also wrong. The kind of wrong that makes even seasoned researchers hesitate before slipping into the water. Part of the unease comes from its shape, a narrow, dark, 300-foot-deep shaft carved by glacial ice. But the real horror is chemical. Past a depth of 100 feet, Lake Toplitz turns anoxic. No oxygen, no light, no life. Anything that sinks beyond that point simply stops decaying. It remains frozen in time, perfectly preserved, like a museum exhibit sealed behind liquid glass. So naturally, the Nazis chose it as a dumping ground. During the final, desperate months of the war, as the Reich collapsed and senior officials scattered like roaches fleeing a lit room, a group of die-hard loyalists retreated into this part of the Austrian Alps. They brought with them a collection of crates, heavy ones, nailed shut, transported first by military truck, then by horse-drawn wagons. The boxes were taken to the lake's edge and pushed into the water one by one until they vanished into the blackness. Nobody knows exactly what those crates contained. Depending on who you talk to, they held gold looted from across Europe, important documents detailing stolen Jewish assets in Swiss banks, or the remains of other secret programs the Nazi leadership didn't want the Allies discovering. But one thing is certain: the lake swallowed them whole. The first hint of what really went down there came in the 1950s, when divers found something bizarre in the muck at the bottom. Crates packed not with gold, but with money. Fake money. British banknotes so perfectly forged that even seasoned bankers struggled to tell the difference. This discovery cracked open the story of Operation Bernhard, one of the most audacious counterfeiting schemes in history. The Nazis planned to destabilize the British economy by flooding it with flawless counterfeit currency, enough to trigger inflation and cripple wartime finances. It almost worked. The forged notes were masterpieces, each bill produced with obsessive precision. But as Allied forces advanced and panic set in, the forgeries became a liability. Anything that could incriminate the people running the operation had to disappear. So the crates were hauled into the mountains and tipped into Lake Toplitz, where the water would preserve them for decades, maybe centuries. When divers retrieved some of the boxes in 1959, they pulled up millions of pounds in counterfeit notes and several printing plates. The Austrian authorities eventually burned or pulped most of it, but the rumors of what still remained only grew louder. After all, if the Nazis dumped counterfeit currency, why not real treasure as well? The problem is getting to it. Lake Toplitz doesn't give up its secrets easily. Just beneath the surface lies a floating layer of tangled, waterlogged trees, an entire forest of trunks and branches resting horizontally in the water. These logs shift unpredictably, collapsing without warning, pinning divers beneath them. Deeper down, pockets of toxic gas bubble up, invisible and deadly. More than one diver has vanished into those depths and never resurfaced. Their bodies, like everything else below 100 feet, are likely still down there, perfectly preserved. Because of these dangers, the Austrian government eventually imposed strict restrictions on underwater exploration. Permits are rare, guidelines are strict. And the legends? Well, those run wild. Some insist there are torpedoes down there, unused missiles, and crates that were never touched. Others whisper about gold sealed beneath the submerged log layer, just out of reach but close enough to keep treasure hunters obsessed. That obsession isn't new. In fact, people have been chasing Lake Toplitz's secret since the war ended. A United States Navy diver drowned there in 1947, trapped in the sunken logs. A magazine-funded expedition in 1959 found more counterfeit money than anyone expected. An illegal dive in 1963 ended in another death, prompting a total ban on private exploration. A German biologist in 1983 stumbled onto more forged bills, some Nazi-era rockets, and because nature has a sense of humor, a new species of worm. And in the year 2000, a high-tech diving capsule spent 3 weeks scanning the depths and found a box of old beer lids. Apparently, some pranksters decided to add their own treasure to history. Even today, the fascination hasn't died. An American treasure hunter signed a contract with Austria for an extended search, convinced his team would uncover something damn big. Locals joke that the lake is their own version of Loch Ness, mysterious, unpredictable, and highly profitable for tourism. But Lake Toplitz isn't the only place where Nazi loot vanished underwater. There's another legend, one with a name that doesn't quite match the truth: Rommel's Gold. Despite the nickname, it wasn't Rommel who orchestrated the heist, but Walter Rauff, an SS officer stationed in Tunisia in 1943. As Allied forces tightened their grip on North Africa, Rauff oversaw the seizure of gold, jewels, and valuables from Jewish families and businesses. More than 6 tons of treasure were loaded for transport to Italy, then intended for Germany. And then nothing. Silence. The ship carrying the cargo either sank en route or was secretly unloaded before anyone could track it. But if there's one lost treasure that overshadows all others, it's the Amber Room. Calling it a room barely does it justice. It was a glowing chamber of carved amber, gold leaf, mirrors, and mosaics. An 18th century masterpiece so dazzling that people called it the 8th wonder of the world. Originally built in Prussia, later gifted to Russia, the Amber Room resided in the Catherine Palace for over 200 years until the Nazis arrived. In 1941, German troops dismantled it piece by piece, packing the panels into 27 crates and shipping them to Königsberg, where it was displayed for 3 years. But when the war turned against Germany, the Nazis disassembled it again, and that was the last confirmed sighting of the original Amber Room. After that, theories multiplied like weeds. Some believe it was destroyed in the bombing of Königsberg. Others insist it was shipped out by sea and sank aboard an evacuation vessel. Some claim it was hidden in mines, tunnels, or bunkers scattered across Eastern Europe. Expeditions have been launched everywhere, from Poland to Germany to the Baltic Sea. In 2017, researchers drilled into a supposed secret chamber only to find an empty pocket of air. A few fragments have surfaced over the years, a mosaic here, a chest there, but the room as a whole remains missing. Its reconstruction, completed in 2003, is breathtaking. But replicas don't solve mysteries. If anything, they deepen them. And that's the strange thing about these underwater legends. They're not fantasies. They're not conspiracy theories. They are real stories with real evidence. Stories of crates pulled from the depths, divers who never resurfaced, and stolen wealth the Nazis scrambled to hide as everything around them collapsed. If gold, money, and priceless art could vanish so completely into lakes and sea channels, what else might still be out there? More importantly, what other treasures were hidden with far more planning and far more documentation? The treasure hunters who sparked a frenzy. When Piotr Koper and Andreas Richter walked into Polish authorities' offices in August 2015, they didn't look like thrill-seekers hoping for a headline. They carried no pirate maps, no wild stories, no frantic energy. What they had were documents, thick, organized, deliberate, and a claim that would ignite one of the largest media storms Poland had seen in decades. Koper, a construction specialist with a sharp eye for soil composition and underground structures, had spent years working on projects that forced him to think in layers: what sits above, what sinks below, and what doesn't belong in the earth at all. Richter, on the other hand, came from an entirely different world. A German amateur historian, he had buried himself in wartime railway archives, freight logs, and obscure transport orders that most scholars ignored. Where others saw legends, Richter saw patterns. And together, for more than 2 years, they had been combing the rugged folds of the Owl Mountains, following faint clues, missing rail segments, and whispered testimonies left behind by locals who still remembered strange nighttime transports in the final weeks of the war. They weren't wandering, they were tracking. Their searches weren't casual excursions. They used increasingly advanced gear, ground-penetrating radar, magnetometric scanners, and old aerial photographs layered over modern satellite images. Every time they thought they were close, the mountain seemed to shift, swallowing their leads. But then, near the small town of Walbrzych, their equipment delivered a reading that froze them where they stood, a shadow beneath the earth, long, perfectly straight, roughly 100 meters in length. They checked the site against old maps. Something strange emerged. A wartime rail siding that appeared on German logistical charts but vanished entirely on post-war Polish maps. Not rerouted, not rebuilt, erased. The missing line ran directly to the area where the radar had found the anomaly. This was more than a coincidence. To Koper and Richter, it was confirmation. So they filed a legal claim. Not a rumor disguised as a discovery. A formal, fully documented submission invoking Poland's finder's fee law, which promises 10% of the value of any recovered treasure to the discoverers. They came prepared with evidence, coordinates, and radar images. And to the shock of nearly everyone, the Polish authorities didn't laugh them out of the room. Quite the opposite. Within days, a deputy minister publicly declared he was inspired 1980 certain the train had been found. That one sentence detonated across global news like dynamite. Walbrzych transformed overnight. Journalists flooded into town. Hotels filled with foreign crews and curious tourists. Local restaurants ran out of tables. At one point, economists estimated the publicity value at more than $200 million. It looked like a modern gold rush. Except this time the gold was supposedly Nazi gold. But the excitement came with tension. The military rolled in almost immediately. Armed guards were stationed around the alleged burial site. Fences went up. The official explanation was safety. After all, the region was once a battlefield, and unexploded ordnance was always a possibility, but that didn't stop rumors from swirling. Some claimed the government feared booby traps. Others said they were protecting the area from looters. A few whispered about political games happening behind closed doors. Reporters tried to get close. Most were turned away. In November 2015, the government authorized 2 teams to conduct deeper non-invasive scans. One team included Koper and Richter. The other was a group from the Krakow Mining Academy, equipped with far more advanced instruments and decades of geological expertise. By December, the Mining Academy released their verdict. There was no train. According to their scans, the anomaly was nothing more than natural rock formations, glacial deposits that happened to reflect radar signals in deceptively neat patterns. To them, the case was closed. But Koper and Richter weren't backing down. They insisted the Academy was misreading its own data, that their team had worked the area for years and understood what they were looking at. They argued that deeper frequencies could easily miss metal objects shielded by dense mineral layers. And to the surprise of many, they managed to raise enough backing for a full-scale excavation, one of the largest private digs Poland had ever seen. August 2016. Cameras everywhere. A 64-person team assembled. Engineers, geologists, chemists, archaeologists, even a demolitions expert in case the Nazis had left behind any unpleasant surprises. The operation cost over $100,000. The world watched as excavators tore into earth that hadn't been touched in 70 years. People waited for the moment when steel would finally glint under the floodlights. It never came. After 7 days of intense digging, nothing. No tracks, no tunnel, no hidden entrance, no ghostly outline of a buried locomotive. Just dirt and disappointment. The press declared the legend dead. Journalists packed their cameras and went home. The world shrugged. The story, it seemed, had collapsed like so many before it, a wartime rumor inflated to absurd proportions. But here's the part almost everyone missed. While the world focused on Walberzik, while crowds watched the empty pits being filled back in, another team, one that wanted nothing to do with television crews, was quietly working somewhere else. Near the town of Lubałka, closer to the Czech border, a private research group had been conducting its own investigation. They weren't interested in fame or treasure-hunting TV. They used satellite-based soil analysis, deep penetration radar, and wartime maps that had never been fully digitized. The clue that drew them to Lubałka was subtle. A rail line that appeared in German transport records but vanished entirely from post-war surveys. Satellite scans showed the ground had been disturbed, then filled in, exactly where the missing siding should have been. So they dug. Carefully. And what they uncovered wasn't legend or imagination. It was unmistakably engineered. A massive rectangular armored structure, reinforced in ways only meant for shielding something valuable. The earth around it had been undisturbed since 1945. The structure was sealed, intentionally. When they finally breached the interior, what they found inside matched every whisper the legends had preserved. Reichsbank-marked crates, wrapped artwork, jewelry, currency from half a dozen occupied nations, personal items clearly taken from real human beings. The gold train wasn't a myth. It existed, just not where the world had been looking. And as the team cataloged each crate with clinical precision, slowly moving toward the rear of the final car, the mood shifted. Something was wrong. Something the Nazis had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide. Something they never intended anyone to see again. Everyone expected treasure. But what they found next changed everything. The last car. No one was supposed to open. The wall at the end of the last car wasn't just another barrier. It looked as if the train itself had grown thicker skin. The steel was heavier, reinforced with an obsessive level of precision that made even the engineers pause. But the detail that froze them wasn't the thickness. It was the welds. They were on the inside. Not a single seam ran along the outer plating. Whoever had sealed that chamber had done it from within, effectively locking whatever or whoever was back there with no way out. No hinges, no latch, no faint outline of a door. Nothing. It was as if the car had been built around a hidden room that wasn't supposed to exist. Even the seasoned workers exchanged looks that said, "Yeah, this isn't normal." The tension at the site shifted almost immediately. Workers who had previously been joking with reporters grew quiet. Officials started holding hushed conversations a few meters away, speaking in low, clipped tones. By the next morning, security had doubled. Soldiers who had been casually posted along the perimeter now stood rigid, rifles slung tight, watching everyone who approached the final car. The message was clear: proceed, but proceed extremely carefully. Cutting through that wall wasn't like slicing open the others. Because the welds were internal, the team had to brace the entire chamber from the outside to prevent collapse. Structural engineers pored over diagrams, calculating how much pressure the cutting tools could apply without triggering a chain reaction. Heat shields were brought in so the torch flames wouldn't weaken the car's frame. Every vibration was monitored. Every centimeter cut was logged. What was supposed to be a half-day job turned into a 48-hour grind. No mistakes, no shortcuts. If something had been hidden here with this much effort, the team couldn't afford to be the ones who destroyed it. By the end of the second night, the tension was so thick you could feel it settling on your shoulders. Coffee cups piled up. Nobody was really talking anymore. Even the casual humor that normally surfaces in stressful work sites had evaporated. Just after dawn, the final sliver of metal gave way. They cut a small viewing slit, just enough to allow a flashlight beam to slip inside. A single worker leaned forward, raised his light, looked, and froze. He didn't shout. He didn't gasp. He simply stopped moving, as if something behind that wall had reached out and turned him to stone. The others gathered around cautiously, one by one shining lights through the opening. People stepped back. Someone whispered a curse under their breath. One of the archaeologists, a woman who had excavated mass graves on 3 continents, pressed a hand to her mouth and walked away, trembling. These were not people who frightened easily. They weren't green or inexperienced. But what they saw wasn't a pile of artifacts or even bodies. It was something far colder. Behind the welded wall, stacked from floor to ceiling, were crates. Dozens of them, each one meticulously numbered, arranged with librarian precision. And inside those crates were belongings, too personal, too specific, too heartbreakingly human to mistake for anything else. Civilian clothing, children's shoes, suitcases with faded name tags, bundles of letters tied with string, folders filled with lists, handwritten names, identification numbers, coded annotations, German shorthand. And then the items that made even the toughest workers go pale. Crates full of eyeglasses, bundles of human hair labeled and stored, personal effects sorted with mechanical efficiency. This wasn't the aftermath of refugees fleeing. It wasn't looted property waiting for redistribution. It was inventory, systematic, deliberate, horrifying inventory. A researcher later said the worst part wasn't the objects, it was the organization. You don't catalog people's lives like that unless you're planning to erase them. No photos from that chamber have ever been released. None. And anyone who was there will only speak anonymously, their voices always containing the same shaken undertone. Several described the same reaction: nausea, dizziness, the overwhelming sense that they were looking into a part of history that had been intentionally scrubbed from every official record. From that moment, the dig stopped being a dig. It became a containment. Access was cut off instantly. Workers were ordered to turn in every piece of documentation: notes, photographs, soil samples, even their unused equipment. Phones were confiscated on the spot. Several team members were told their contracts had been terminated, escorted out by armed guards, and instructed not to return. By nightfall, unmarked trucks began pulling up to the site. They arrived without headlights, their engines rumbling quietly under the trees. Whatever they were loading, or unloading, was done beneath heavy tarps. Every vehicle was gone before sunrise. Officially, control shifted to the Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. Unofficially, nobody could say who was really calling the shots anymore. The language in press releases became strangely sterile, full of ongoing assessments and structural reviews. Reporters who tried returning to the site found roads blocked and were politely but firmly sent away. Phone numbers that had previously worked for press inquiries went dark. Drone operators who attempted to fly over the area reported electronic interference, signals dropping abruptly, batteries draining in minutes. The few who captured footage saw little more than a fenced perimeter and tarps stretching across the dig like shrouds. Then came the media silence. For months in 2015, headlines around the world had followed every rumor about the train. Now, suddenly nothing. Not even debunkings, not even denials, just quiet. A few outlets mentioned that a train may have been located, but none reported on the final car. Even networks known for digging their teeth into government secrecy backed off. One American anchor asked on air why the excavation had vanished from public attention. She never got an answer. By then, the narrative was impossible to ignore. The gold was never the issue. The valuables were never the threat. The wall existed for one reason: to bury something deeper, darker, and infinitely more uncomfortable than treasure. And if a single train could contain a chamber like that, welded shut from the inside, hidden for 80 years under layers of soil and bureaucratic denial, then what else might still be out there? But those tunnels had purposes. They weren't built on a whim. Someone knew what was going into them, knew what was being sealed away long before the world caught wind of the gold train. And now, decades later, when one of those sealed walls is finally breached, the response is immediate and absolute. Shut it down. Control the narrative. Classify everything. Some secrets don't stay buried because people forgot. They stay buried because people work tirelessly to keep them that way. And here's the question that now haunts historians, researchers, and anyone who has looked too deeply into the Owl Mountains. If this was hidden for 80 years, what else is still buried out there? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.